if that volatility isn't enough, you currently have a great article up on ESPN.com because Max Verstappen may have hinted at quitting Formula One as well. What more can you tell us on that?
So this goes back to a story which developed throughout the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, where it started with the president of the FIA saying that Formula One drivers should swear less, and there was a comparison with rappers and him saying we're not like them. I think that is a slightly problematic statement in itself. Lewis Hamilton pointed out as much, saying it has a racial element to it, and I think that was the case. So bizarre that Ben Slem would be using that example when he's talking about driver language. Anyway, to get back to the Max side of it, well, Max went off and dropped a F-bomb in the first press conference after those MBS quotes surfaced. I still wonder whether he did it. There's a bit of me thinks, he did it to test the waters a little bit. So limited sympathy that he then got called in front of the stewards. And in the past, and there is past precedent for the penalty a driver will get if they swear. So in the past, a very similar example, we'll just go with that, is Toto Wolff and Fred Vasseur at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, also dropping F-bombs in the FIA press conference in relation to all the issues they had with the track in first practice in Las Vegas last year. And they got formal warnings. And there were some mitigating circumstances in that, a drain cover had gone through the floor of one of Fred Vasseur's cars, and Toto Wolff was being agitated by a journalist in that press conference. Worth watching, actually, if you want to go back and have some entertainment. Yeah, and whereas Max, Max was talking about his car in the Singapore press conference and just saying that it was effed when, as soon as he went out in qualifying, he knew from that moment that that he was going to have a problem for the whole of the Baku weekend. And so the stewards decided that it was coarse language, vulgar language, potentially offensive language, and therefore gave him the equivalent of community service in F1. He's got to do some kind of public, so something that helps public service. I can't remember the exact quote on it, but anyway, along the lines of kind of, I guess, going to like a stewarding thing, or perhaps working with marshals or something like that. I can imagine it'll be F1 related. And Max just thought this was utterly absurd. And I do tend to agree with him that this idea that drivers in situations like that, where also to be clear about his press conference, it isn't being broadcast live. It can be used by broadcasters, but they will have the opportunity to bleep out, whatever he says, which is the same as the team radio. And also, I think, the reality is that as long as it is censored, there is an element of the rawness of who these drivers are and the personality. And so Max, by the end of the weekend, after qualifying, he was in the top three, which means he had to go to another FIA press conference, and he just gave one-word answers and very short answers as a kind of protest to this, and then held a full press conference with everybody outside, inevitably of which the topics were not about qualifying, but about his relationship with the FIA and how much it's worsening. And he did the same on Sunday after being in the top three in the race. And then when we were talking to him in the Red Bull hospitality, he kind of made clear that if things like this continue, it's not just this, but if there's all these kind of things that make it less enjoyable to be a racing driver, and he has to worry about this and worry about that, then why would he bother continuing, beyond kind of current contract ends in 28? We know how much we speculate about where he might end up, but why would he continue when he could go off and do another racing series or all the other things that he is genuinely interested in doing? Always said he's not too worried about breaking all the records, loves winning, but it's not the only thing in his life. And I think if F1 becomes this, I guess in his eyes, it's kind of like nanny state where whatever you do, you get penalized and it's no longer any fun, then why would he commit so much of his life to it? And that was essentially how he left it at the end of the weekend. And we'll have to wait and see how he feels because we've got this big break now before Austin, how he feels when he gets to the United States, and whether he's, kind of had a chance to talk it through either with the FIA or the people around him, or he's going to double down on it.
Did you say nanny state?
Nanny state. Yeah, I think is that not a term that translates to the
I don't
United
think
States?
so. Do you elaborate?
Basically an over-controlling government,
It's like 1984.
officials. Yeah, Yeah, George Orwell's 1984 is a fairly good example. I mean, that's an extreme nanny state. That's beyond nanny state, I think.
Yeah, that's yeah,
Uh,
that's it's not quite what I was
yeah,
thinking, but
but an intervening government is
Okay.
often called a nanny state in this country. So the Labour Party is often called a nanny state.
Okay, fair enough. It would be a shame to think that the FIA would run off one of the greatest F1 drivers just by being too controlling, wouldn't you think?
yeah, I mean, I was in that. Lawrence and I were both there on the Sunday. I don't buy with Max when he's like, "I'd quit on this," because I think I think when he says it there and then, he's kind of thinking that. But I don't know. I think Max. I kind of agree. I think part of me thinks he went in there and was like, "I'll just drop an F bomb, see if I can get away with it," because Max did say sometimes people don't speak. It's not their first language, but Max speaks English a lot of the time. And he's if I'm not mistaken, I mean, most of the time in Monte Carlo, he's speaking English because he's not in a relationship with a Dutch woman. He's, Kelly, is it Kelly Piquet? It's Kelly
Okay.
Piquet,
Yeah,
is Brazilian. So they're not speaking Dutch to each other. They'll be speaking English to each other. So the idea that he just like let this swear word out of nowhere, I was kind of like, well, it's not the best. I don't know. I just think I thought he handled it very well once the thing came out saying he had to do the service. But I don't know. I think Max does have frustrations about a lot of things with Formula One. That is definitely true, and we know that. He hates doing a lot of the media. He hates that someone says something in a press conference and it gets put to him. 10 minutes later in his own press conference, he hates all that stuff. I think he hates the kind of all the bits that come with it. But yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it was. I mean, maybe he feels that strongly about it, but I don't know if it's a quitting matter. I mean, I think that
but I don't think he said that either. He said it was one thing that is building up
yeah,
toward
yeah,
that. And this is what I tried to lay out in the article as well, is that it's not just that. And then another example he brought up was Carlos Sainz getting a financial fine for crossing the track after his accident in qualifying. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to run across a live track, but in Carlos Sainz's case, there's a red flag. All the cars were going back to the pits before the point that he was crossing the track. And Matt's kind of said, look, we've been doing this since, we were kids in go-karts. We know what we're doing around
Right.
racetracks. And so I think it's this wider thing. Sorry to interrupt, Nate, but just to point that
no, no,
out,
it's fine.
I don't think Max was saying, I'm going to quit because they've given me
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
That's not it. It's more like it's all building up. And at some point, I might find this is just not worth my
yeah,
time because he's got other things he wants to do. He really does. And,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's clear.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is clear with him, isn't it? I mean, he has consistently said to us in the media that he doesn't want to still be racing kind of beyond 30 years old, or maybe into his early 30s. So, and that part of it with Max, I do believe. I think he is someone who would kind of get to a certain point. I think it'll be very difficult for him if he finds another car that can win him championships. That will be the big killer. I think it'll be easier for him to walk. If let's say he gets to 32 and he's like, okay, I'm actually in a rubbish team, car's not very good, then it's very easy for him to say, right, I always said I was going to quit. I'll leave. But yeah, it's definitely to your point, Katie. I think it's all these. If all these things contributed to kind of make him just walk away, that would be a real shame. But I also actually I would really respect it if he did that. I would
Me
really
too.
respect if he got to 32, he'd won all these titles because it's great to see Fernando still in the sport. It's great to see Lewis still in the sport, but Fernando is waiting for the chance to be champion again, and it may never come again for him. And we all think his legacy is not going to change whether he quit 8 years ago or he quits in 2 years. His legacy was always going to be one of the greats of the modern era. Obviously it's better if you're a 7-time champ than 2-time champ, but he's kind of holding on for that. If Max just said, I'm done, Rosberg did that after he won a championship. Was like, I'm done. Lots of reasons behind it, but it was like, wow, okay, to actually do that when you're on top and to say, no, I'm now finished. I think it takes a lot to do that. So if he ever does do that, maybe we can house this clip somewhere and we can replay it. But yeah, it would be pretty impressive. But yeah, if it's just because of an accumulation of F1 being silly, that would kind of take some of the I guess some of the sting out of that story in terms of because then the argument would be, well, F1's done this to itself, etc., etc.
But I would be willing to bet when it comes to Max Verstappen walking away from the sport, we will never know until after the fact and it's a done deal. Like we were talking about Danny Ricciardo getting his swan song or the last dance, like getting to have his farewell moment. I don't
Yeah.
think Max Verstappen wants that. He's going to just walk away and it's going to blindside all of us.
Well, he's at the right team to do that, Katie, because Red
He
Bull won't
is.
give him it anyway. They'll be like, is he leaving? We don't know. It could be Liam Lawson, it could be Yuki. We don't know. But you should just go say goodbye to him anyway. We gave him the fastest lap just to be sure, because he might retire.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.